All right. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to my presentation today. I'll be talking about the New York City Climate Resilience Plan Mapper. And this is a project that I helped to develop while I was a summer intern at the Regional Plan Association. I'm still interning with them, but now working on different projects related to resilience. But I'm very excited to share what we did over the summer as well. Just a little bit more about me. I'm currently a second-year urban planning student at Columbia University, the Graduate School for Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. Right now, I'm concentrating in urban analytics as well as community economic development. So hopefully you'll see that this map project is a good combination of both of those things. So super excited to get started today. Okay, so Okay, I figured probably an apt but also bleak way to start this presentation would be to just take us 10 years back to when Hurricane Sandy first made landfall in New York City. I'm sure many folks in this room know, but New York City was just really ill-equipped to prepare for a storm of this nature. Just our transit infrastructure, our housing stock, our building infrastructure really took a huge toll. For over 40 people lost their lives during this storm. And even thinking back to last year during Hurricane Ida, like the subway inundation that happened was just, we were just really not prepared for a storm of this nature. And at the same time, it's important to keep at the front of our minds the neighborhoods that really bore the brunt of Superstorm Sandy. And these neighborhoods tended to be lower income. They were predominantly comprised of BIPOC communities. And these communities didn't even have the resources, just based on our complicated history of housing and also environmental racism in this country, to even be prepared for and then also have the resources to recover from the storm's aftermath. So the question that's really on everyone's mind, on my mind especially when we're here at this conference today, is New York City ready to withstand another storm like Sandy? And with climate change, we're only seeing more erratic weather patterns, like more intense rain events, hotter summers. Hurricane Ida from last year, we were just simply not prepared. 10 years after this devastating event, I think I'm really wondering if the city is ready to withstand another storm like this. And I think we really have a long way to go before we can say we're truly prepared to deal with another intense rain event. So with these questions and reflections about Hurricane Sandy in mind, this then set the context for this mapping project that we undertook over the summer. And one of the main goals that we had for this is partnering with community groups who already have been doing the hard work to set New York City on this 10-year path to equitable climate resilience. And these groups also have been doing this since pre-Sandy as well. So a little bit more context, this mapping project was a collaboration between 3 different agencies: the Regional Plan Association, Rebuilt by Design, and the Environmental Defense Fund. And Amy's here as well from RBD. So the purpose of this map project here was really to show all the amazing climate resilience work that had been done and has been going on for a long time at the local community level. We know right now that the city is about to embark on developing a greater climate adaptation framework for the city. So we wanted to be sure that all the hard work that was happening on the ground within these communities is acknowledged and, most importantly, really heard by the city as they go about their planning for this larger citywide resilience efforts. So also related to this mapping project is another aspect of work that EDF is leading, which looks at developing goals and indicators of resilience, specifically as articulated by frontline community stakeholders. And this, I think, is really important, knowing that resilience can mean many different things in New York City. And hopefully you'll be able to see some of that in the mapping project as well. Okay, so in short, I think if there's anything you need to take away from this mapping project, it's this one goal that the city absolutely does not need to start from scratch when they're coming up with their citywide climate resilience strategies. And as you'll see later in the presentation, there's already been a ton of work that has been happening on the ground. And so it's really important for policymakers to really look to community members who know their neighborhoods the best in order to plan ahead for our resilient future. Okay, so since Sandy, there's already been a lot of this movement that's been happening at the neighborhood scale. communities actually have been already taking it upon themselves to start this process of rebuilding their own communities. And in many cases, this is even because of just general neighborhood disinvestment that they weren't even given the resources to help them in the first place. One really great example that I think about constantly is the Red Hook mesh Wi-Fi network in Brooklyn, where residents set up their own Wi-Fi transmitters all across the roofs of their neighborhoods as both an emergency preparedness tool as well as a tech equity measure in their neighborhood to really make sure that community members all had access to free Wi-Fi during the case of an emergency. And this is just one of many, many efforts happening citywide post-Sandy. So it's kind of interesting that all these local ground up efforts are happening all across the city, and yet sometimes they brush up against this tension with larger, citywide, city scale plans that have been going on. And this is expected, right? Just because city reports that have come out, the guidelines that have come up target a much larger scale compared to your local community-based organization or even volunteers in your neighborhood that might be doing things just out of their own time. And while these plans aren't bad at all, in fact, I think they're super important to really get New York City on this path to having a really systematic approach to climate resilience planning. I think sometimes, at least when I read these plans, it can be hard to find your community or find your neighborhood in a big plan like this. Do these plans really take into account the work that has already been done in your neighborhoods to get yourselves on track for climate resiliency in New York City? So to me, I think it's really important for these citywide resilience plans that exist in multiple different agencies as well to be guided by community efforts. And in this way, I think we can make sure that larger city plans are not replicating what's already happening on the ground, and or worse, even overriding local context as we plan for larger strategies. Okay, so with all that in mind, I'm going to take you through a little bit of the process that we use to develop this mapping tool. I'll share some of the reflections that I had learned along the way, and also I'll leave some time for a live demonstration of this mapping tool at the very end as well. So you all can learn how to use this for your own research and advocacy in the climate adaptation space as well. Okay, so a little bit about more of our methodology that we used over the summer. I think I'll preface this by saying that with tools like these that have a very visual product, maybe it's a map or some sort of infographic, I think it's easy to kind of focus on this end product and forget that a lot of work actually happened to get us to the end visual outcome. So in fact, over the summer, these 3 phases that I have up here on this slide took up most of the work. It was basically a summer's work just doing the three aspects of this project. And of course, we had lots and lots of help from community organizations who provided these plans as well. So I'm going to take you through all 3 of these sections, kind of go through the details of each one. And then hopefully by the end, you'll see that this really was a mixed methods approach where we combined qualitative information and also quantitative information, qualitative coming from the plans, reading through each one, and then trying to enumerate each plan and then make it really a spatial data set that we can use for future analysis. Okay, so the first step was really gathering these plans. So much of this process was crowdsourcing, casting our nets far and wide, and really speaking to folks within our networks who we knew were doing really great climate resilience work that's been happening on the ground. A large part of it too was honestly doing our own research to understand what's been going on out there that we might not have been aware of. So most of this happened through a Google form and email outreach where we asked folks to submit their plans to us. And I also want to highlight during this process, we had a great partnership as well with the Columbia Climate School and the Columbia Resilient Coastal Communities Project. So they were also doing their own work, collecting their own inventory of resilience plans. So we connected and kind of shared our projects, and they very generously also agreed to share their information with us too. So a couple of reflections already from this first stage of work. So we got a bunch of different plans. On the one hand, we had some really granular neighborhood scale ones, like the one I have up here, the Northern Manhattan Climate Action Plan from REACT, an organization that's doing really great work on health equity as well. And at the same time, we had really large projects too, like the Big U proposal. And if people are not familiar with the context, the Big U proposal won Rebuilt by Design's competition for a coastal resiliency project in Lower Manhattan. And this proposal actually, became sort of adopted by city agencies who are doing their own climate resilience plans and programs in this area as well. So kind of balancing between these two different scales of plans that we got, even from the same Google form, from the same outreach methods, it became a matter of thinking through which plans we really wanted to emphasize in our mapping tool. So while we included, government-led plans like the Big U proposal, we also wanted to make sure that the focus really stayed on community level plans, just like the one that WeAct is doing. The second part of all of that was really assigning each plan spatial data. And I have it kind of pretty simple up on the slide here, but this part actually got really tricky, and it involved kind of making personal, decisions on how communities should be represented. So I feel like this slide is maybe for the GIS nerds that might be in the room, a little bit more methodology on that. But so this involved, reading through each plan and kind of understanding what geographical sort of boundaries that each plan covered. And while that might sound easy, it gets really complicated by the fact that, when we received plans from different community organizations, not all of them had, say, their own database of spatial information. Some of them didn't even have maps on their reports. And that's completely fine, because a lot of these efforts sometimes were informal, and we still wanted to map these and show them in this tool. So there was that data aspect. But other data that exists out there, such as open data sources, or maybe from city agency data sets that map neighborhood boundaries. So one key example would be like neighborhood tabulation areas. A lot of these boundaries that exist out there in these official data sets sometimes are very incongruent and contentious when you actually ask people who have lived in these neighborhoods for a long time. Like, they don't agree that, the neighborhood boundaries in these data sets actually conform with their own lived experience of living in those neighborhoods. So I have a little infographic here on how we kind of went about this community plan representation. It then became this problem, we had a bit of back and forth on how we should represent each plan, whether they should be points or polygons, kind of detailing neighborhood boundaries. So in the end, I think we ultimately decided we wanted to move away from really prescribing neighborhood boundaries that community members might not agree with. So we came to a happy medium in the end, which was to have a point with a 1/4 mile buffer. So you get kind of the specificity of where the plan might be located, but at the same time, having that buffer gives it that wiggle room to also get to that neighborhood aspect. So you'll see that the circles on the map here are actually points with walking distance buffers. And this is how it's represented on the final outcome as well. Okay, and then lastly, I think with all the different information that we had, the main goal right at the end is to create a library or this running data set with every single plan that we had and its accompanying spatial information. So another element that was really important in this phase was to really categorize the different kinds of climate resilience themes that showed up in each plan. So for example, in this data set too, we had columns that worked off of a binary, like 1 if it does have it, 0 if it doesn't. So for example, if a plan had coastal resilience, we gave that a 1. If a plan had urban heat island effect related strategies, we also gave that a 1. So I think the important part of this is to really recognize that climate resilience means many, many different things across neighborhoods in New York City. And at the same time, a single plan can also have many different climate resilience themes. And this was important for us as we kind of went through how we want to conduct the spatial analysis of different resilience plans in the city. Okay, now we're going into the exciting part, which is doing a live demo of this map. So one important thing is that this mapping tool is meant for anyone to use if you're interested in climate adaptation, if you're working at a city agency, if you're doing your own research in school of your climate resilience, or if you're a community-based organization interested in seeing what work is being done out there that might be similar to your own. This map hopefully will be useful for you. And one thing I'll preface before starting the demo is that this tool is still technically in beta mode, which means we're still accepting feedback and suggestions on, how it looks and how it's functioning for you. But folks will also be able to submit feedback even after official release. Okay, so here is the Climate Resilience Plan Mapper. When it opens up, you'll be met with a welcome message just to learn a bit more about the background of this project. Importantly, in this section here, you can use this form that's here to submit your feedback on things that you'd like to see improved. So you can just hide that. The default view for this map would be the community-led plans, and these plans had a community engagement aspect, and in our case, were mostly run by community-based organizations. You can also add government-led plans and also academic plans. For the government-led plans, you can see that we didn't include every single resilience plan from city agencies because that would basically take up the whole map, I think. So for example, we did not include DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection's Green Infrastructure Plan, since that covers a more citywide scale. The main point of this mapper is to really hone in on place-based, neighborhood-based plans. For the academic plans as well, we heard from folks during our outreach that they would appreciate actually an inventory of, say, all the urban planning studios that have been working on climate resilience or other academic projects going around the city that have this focus. And while we understand that these might not be as community embedded as the plans from the community development, community organizations, we thought this would still be, an interesting idea and inspiration point if different neighborhoods wanted to take these ideas on for themselves as well. So the interactivity of the map lets you, click on each point. You can learn more about the organization, the status of each plan, and also a brief description on what the plan's about. And if you are interested too, you can also click on the title up here, and it'll take you to the actual report or the website of that community. Okay, so just with this first section of plans toggled on, you can already see there are interesting patterns, in just the spatial distribution of these plans. But the question then becomes, what if you're also interested in what types of plans these community organizations have been working on? This is where the second panel on this map comes in. So you can press all these different plan themes, and they will highlight according to what type of climate resilience theme they have. So here I have coastal flooding on, we have stormwater flooding, urban heat, green infrastructure, ecology restoration, rethinking streets, emergency preparedness, climate adaptation education, as well as community health. And here we really wanted to think through climate resilience themes. Just knowing that this word can be it can be complicated, it can mean many different things. So for the purposes of climate resilience themes, here are the list of the types that we have. And then to really go even further with the spatial analysis tool of this mapper, we added also additional layers that kind of detail climate risk. So you can also turn on layers for the 2050 flood zone. We have sea level rise as well. Importantly, for the purposes of this map too, we have Hurricane Sandy surge extent. And here you can really, if you have both of these layers on, say Hurricane Sandy and also coastal flooding, you can really get a sense of, say, plans that have emerged, say, out of the impact of Hurricane Sandy, and see some interesting patterns there. Stormwater flooding as well is an additional layer, and then heat vulnerability. And I kind of want to talk about this layer as well, because this is, I think, a layer that sometimes gets missed when we talk about climate resilience. This is, I think on average, urban heat affects community members more than flooding does on a given year. So you can turn on heat vulnerability and at the same time turn on these urban heat plans and really see whether there is an overlap between, see if there's an overlap between plans that are focusing on urban heat and whether or not they're located in neighborhoods with the highest risk of urban heat. So for example, you can zoom in here to this area in the South Bronx. You can see, South Bronx Unite is working on an urban heat mapping project as well. So this is just, a couple of ways that you can use this map for your own research and your own advocacy. And yeah, please let us know how it's been working for you. I'm going to go back to my slides. Okay, and so, okay, a couple of reflections too on just, the demo and also the process of making this map. So it's kind of interesting to see where a lot of the plans so far have been concentrated. And I just pulled up two different examples here. You can see there's lots of government-led plans, both in the lower Manhattan area as well as Edgemere. And this doesn't really come as too big of a surprise to me, given that coastal flooding has been such a priority in the past few years. But at the same time, I think it's really important to look at neighborhoods that maybe don't have as many of these plans. These include places, I chose two different plan themes to really illustrate this example, the issue of stormwater flooding as well as urban heat island effect. You see here that, Inwood faces relatively higher risk of stormwater flooding, and yet there's no plan that's located there at the current moment. Similarly, in Queens, neighborhoods like Hollis and Jamaica also face a higher rate of stormwater flooding, but really I think there should be more plans sort of, going to neighborhoods such as these facing these sorts of climate risks. And then again, urban heat island effect. Here I zoomed into a couple of neighborhoods in East Brooklyn that face, the highest urban heat risk in the city, and yet there are no urban heat plans or no plans at all in this area that really are targeting place-based initiatives to combat these climate risks. And maybe also this is an issue of outreach, right? Like maybe we just didn't, we don't know if there's a plan happening in this area. And if you do, please submit in the Google form to let us know so I can add this to the map. But if it's a case where there's really not enough going on here, then I think this tool can be a really important way to show, to city agencies working on issues like this, that, these are the neighborhoods that don't have these place-based initiatives. And to be able to divert more resources there. Okay, and then, just reaching the end of the presentation, immediate next steps would be to really, I invite you to try this tool out for yourself. Let us know what's working for you, how you're using it for your own research, for your own interests, and submit to the forum your feedback, your suggestions on ways we can improve this map. So I have in the second bullet here that the map will be officially launched in early November, and I have this in quotations because I don't want it to seem that you can't submit your feedback even after this official launch. In fact, this mapping tool is going to be continually updated throughout, just indefinitely as more climate adaptation plans arise, and I'm sure they will. And just for additional background too, this map was in beta form the whole of October to really get community feedback to see if this tool is working for folks. And we really wanted to hear from the community organizations that were represented on this map to see, if they're okay with the way that they've been represented, because I know that's always really important to keep in mind. And lastly, we will continue updating plans even after official launch. So please try it out. Let me know what you think. And thanks so much for tuning into this presentation. I've left my contact if you want, and also the link to the map. So please try it out. Thank you. Okay, I'm happy to take any questions if there are questions. Or yes.
I have to say, first of all, I am so impressed that you are a master's student and you've done not only a incredible present, but like the work itself is incredible, but the presentation was superb. So thank you so much. I have a question to connect the first part of your presentation with the data. You said one of the big motivations was that you didn't see the scalar disconnect between the big citywide plans and not being able to see communities and then looking at these plans. So I'm wondering, beyond putting the dots on the map, have you looked into what these plans say and whether or not they are different from what the big city scale plans are talking about?
I think that's a really great question. And I would say that maybe is related, I'll go back a few slides, to another aspect of work that EDF is leading on this project. So really developing these goals and indicators of resilience. So I think, just as someone who looked through all of the plans and looked through the city plans as well to like read through their content, I will say that there are there are differences in the way that resilience indicators are articulated. I would say on a community scale, some of them, emphasize a lot more aspects of community health. Some of them emphasize a lot more on education, on climate adaptation strategies in their neighborhood. So in just, based on my own reading, this is not something that is emphasized as much on some of the larger scale plans. So EDF is actually continuing this aspect of work now, really having these focus group discussions with community-based organizations to find ways to maybe like align a little bit more on what neighborhood level resilience indicators might be and how we might communicate that with city agencies. Yes.
Do you feel there was enough time to come up with a methodology that would be as inclusive as needed for this kind of project, given that it was mostly just the summer? And where are some of those gaps?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think about that a lot. I think it took a summer's work to get all of the methodology like down into 3 simple steps. But I do recognize that, especially the outreach aspect of it, I think that's part of the reason why we had this beta period as well. Like we kind of took a while to hear people's feedback before like official launch. One, I guess, when I was doing my own outreach, for me, I was really interested in community plans that maybe took on a more informal role. So say, I'm sure there are tons of plans out there that don't have an official report on the website, that maybe had something, buried in a newsletter or as more like, a word of mouth kind of program. The email outreach and the Google survey, I would say, had some challenges when reaching folks who kind of ran their neighborhood initiatives in that way. So in terms of outreach, I think part of extending it beyond the summer to collect feedback was to get a little bit more of that kind of granular detail. But yeah, I would say the whole point of this mapping tool is that it's going to be continually updated. So hopefully we get into more of the inclusion of including plans like that. And yeah, I mean, if you know of anything that's happening in your own neighborhoods, please let me know, because I'm really interested in mapping things like that as well.
Maybe I can also answer on
Yes.
the methodology question, is that we were very, very specific that we wanted it to be resilient plans, or plans that have resilience in it. And we defined what that was. And as a group of 3 plus, everybody who we know, we knew that we could get far enough to get as many plans that were probably out there. I'm sure that we've missed a few, but I don't think we've missed that, the bulk of them, because we've been working in this space for 10 years. So we know these community organizations, we know what's out there. We've been referring to their plans for years. We were just excited to have a place where we could bring it all together.
Yes.
What about including in the sort of like tag information where these plans have been referenced elsewhere? So if like a neighborhood level or community-based plan has been referenced by Department of City Planning, for instance, or DCP, I feel like that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We kind of struggled a bit with that, like which organization to have in the interactive part of the pop-up. There are some plans that we tried to highlight. For example, in the Big U proposals, we have in some parts of the description, in some of these plans, kind of like talking about how they were related to other plans. But I think that's a good point, especially with the more community-based organization ones, to like have references to city agencies that maybe have collaborated with them a little bit more. Right now they exist in the description, but maybe we can think through having another layer of collaboration or something like that. Yeah.
I want to echo others that have commended you for this incredible work, and the clarity of your narrative on this is really exciting to see. I'm curious if you had considered the intersection with environmental justice for additional layers, particularly the impact of pollution back to overflows or in the significant maritime industrial areas, given that floods also carry those pollutants into neighborhoods and cities along the streets.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, I think, that's a great question. We did actually test some of those layers out. We decided, I can't remember the reason why we didn't include CSO, but maybe it was just like the way that it was crowding over other information on the map. But I think that's a great point. Someone, I think, in another webinar that we hosted also brought up this map that was done by like some sort of like an EJ map to show some of the things that you were talking about. So I think that's definitely a layer that we're interested in adding as an additional contextual climate risk layer as well.
Great, and that's, I think, interesting and salient for right now, given the EJ investments that are coming down the pipe for the state and city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that.
Just to follow on that,
Yeah.
how do you all plan or are thinking currently, and it could be just initial ideas of this list, because there are environmental justice groups, there are organizations that have these resources on their own. They look for funding and resources to continue this work. And so there, and there even are the environmental groups like Swiss Coalition, for example, that are working on, are trying to work, and river people that are trying to work on tourable maps and water quality maps, etc. So maybe the question is, how do you hope that this resource can align and or support those other initiatives rather than consolidate on the regional plan association's website?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think that was also part of the reason why we had like this interagency collaboration as well. I think I'll speak a little bit again to EDF's work with the goals and sort of resilience indicators project. I think there we're really kind of jumping off the ideas that we generated from this mapping tool to really kickstart these discussions, not kickstart, but to really like have community-based organizations at the table to really come into alignment on like some of these resilience themes that they're noticing in their own neighborhoods. I think beyond that, hopefully there will be more sort of opportunities in that space to have people come up with ways to like really find useful strategies that they can rely on this tool to help them with their own sort of community-based work. There was one thing I wanted to say, but I forgot. It will come back to me, but I'll get back to you. I was gonna say something else about the map. But right now it's publicly available. I mean, the link it's hosted on RPA's website, but a lot of the community-based organizations that we are collaborating with are aware of this map and have shown really great support for what they can use for their own, this tool that they can use for their own research and advocacy. So I feel like hopefully that's a good sign that, tools like this are hopefully going to be really helpful for community-based organizations.
No, it's not showing up on searching on phones.
It's
Oh, the
actually-
same
because
link?
There's a URL, it's hosted on RPA's website, but there's a URL that you can get there. And I think it's NYC Resilience Map.
I think, yeah. Is this link not working for you? Just this, wait, let me put up the link again.
Maybe it's just my phone.
It works on iPad, which
Yeah, right now it's not mobile compatible because I just think the nature of the map doesn't lend well to mobile interface, but here, you can try this link again. Hopefully it works. Oh gosh, I can't remember what I was gonna say. Okay, yes.
just a couple quick questions. So it sounds like the EDS or the community goals and indicators are really going to come out and kind of that. Is there a plan to put those and match those when you press like a plan to like get those as well?
We haven't really discussed that yet, but
Definitely.
yeah.
I mean, I can speak to that. There's an overall plan that we should, as a city, be able to measure resilience and our progress towards resilience, and to kind of figure out what that means. And that's the reason why the indicator project started. Like, okay, we're 10 years out, and people are asking, are we better, are we worse? And they're complicated answers. So we wanted to make sure that the indicators were where communities believe the city should go. So that's that project. And the idea is that over time, it's measurable. So it might be every year or something like that. If you can imagine the city getting a grade or, putting out a report every year of saying like exactly where we are and doing it from the indicators that the community creates versus the city doing it for themselves.
And that's not that like ongoing project that will live somewhere else potentially. So these are overlapping, not parallel projects, but like they'll be
I think they're
different
very
places.
interrelated.
Definitely.
So the first, I don't want to talk for Kate, she's here somewhere, but she's not in the room, and she's leading that project and we're all supporting it. But what she did is they started with everything they learned from this project. They read through all the reports and like saw how the communities were talking about measurements and things like that. And then they used that as the base. And then they brought it to the community organizations and said, like, did we get it right? And they've been having a really lovely conversation last Friday, Rise to Resilience for 2 hours. People are really getting involved in thinking through this.
That's great. And I just have one other question about the themes.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of related. I was just wondering, in the creation of those themes that you have, like, were those things that I assume that you came with the idea that these are things you expect? Were there any that came that you were unexpected? You had to add like a theme because like
Oh yeah, we
you
added a
didn't
ton.
know, like,
We
yeah,
didn't-
just kind of
We
understanding that
didn't start
process.
with the themes,
Yeah.
we started with the reports,
Definitely.
and then that led us to the.
So that
Yeah.
coding process kind of happened from
Exactly.
the ground up.
Exactly that. I think we read through the plans. We had like maybe some idea, just like climate adaptation strategies in general. But I think I mentioned a bit in the presentation, like ideas about community health and climate adaptation education were things that came out after reading some of these plans. And that's when, circling back to a question that was asked earlier, we noticed that those goals were maybe not as much the focus for the citywide plans. Yeah. I wanted to go back to a question because I
Thank you so much.
remember, yeah, no worries. I remembered what I wanted to say, which is that after the webinar that we had hosted, sharing this beta launching this map, we included organizations like LES Ready, React, and from that webinar, those organizations had reached out to us to actually like lead these sessions on how they can use the map for themselves in their own life. So, oops.
Yeah.
What happened? It's signed out. I was going to say that, we would be very open to hosting those sorts of sessions as well. Like if community-based organizations are interested in really learning the ins and outs of how to use this map, we've been kind of doing sessions like that as well. And we, RPA recently did one with LES Ready. One more question.
Any kind of just a curious question, great job. Just wanted to know if there's disclosure on like how the other than and what happens and vulnerability or
Like where we got the data from the additional layers?
how we are calculating it, is there weightage given to like the social factor or
Yeah, so I would say it's the mapping tool is not as much. That's not really an aspect of what we were really looking to do with the mapper. I think with the additional layers, we were using data that had come out already from city agencies. So for example, the heat vulnerability index, that's DOH-MH data that exists where they split every neighborhood basically up by community district. And then that data set gave an index on what the heat risk was across the city. So all those additional layers is data that exists out there that city agencies themselves use to inform their own planning around the infrastructure. So I'm not sure if the mapping tool will be used to like calculate things like that. I think it's more for community-based groups to like use it how they want to use it. But if you know of any other sort of like open data or city agency data that exists that should be added to this map, that's something that I think we want to have up there as just like additional information, additional context to have.
Can I also add that the controller put out a report a couple of months ago that included a map that listed all the different resilience projects. Never before had it been on a website. No one knew the status of projects. He actually his staff went contract by contract with the controller, and that's how they got to that list. So we knew that existed, and we wanted to do something that was different, but we wanted to do something that together gives like a fuller picture. So this map doesn't have all the city planned at all, but that is like more directed to the larger scale projects. And I think that their map links to our map and our
Yeah, we link it in ours.
Too.
Yeah. Theirs, I think, it goes into more of the financing of different infrastructure projects, which is not what our map is trying to do. I think there's no map that exists right now that really looks at the community scale, like local community-based efforts. So that's kind of like the gap that we wanted to fill in the EJ discourse. Yeah, but that map is definitely linked on ours as well if you wanted to take a look.
Is there a thought to making the shapefile available as well?
Yeah, I think I will need to talk to the RPA data research manager about that. That to me is really important to have people be able to download shapefiles and like use the data set that we made over the summer for their own uses. So I think that's something that I want that to happen for sure. Yeah, I think it will have to be definitely, because this project is going to be continually updated, it will have to be like, uploading a new data set as and when like new plans come. But I really hope that would be a feature that would be on this map. That would be great. Okay, well, if no one else has questions, thank you so much.